food security. We welcome Abdel Karim Yahya and
مؤسس للسيركولاريتي. يدير الجلسة سالي موسى مقدمة برامج ومديرة جلسات. So our moderator for the second session is Sally Musa, international speaker and presenter.
Take a seat, everybody.
Hey, so Anna Hina.
Yes.
Okay. Oops.
Fantastic. All right. All right, here we are. Good morning, everyone. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this, the 7th edition of the Knowledge Summit here at Expo 2020 Dubai. And our session this morning, food security between sustainable supply chains and self-sufficiency. A big welcome as well to our virtual audience who are joining us online as well. Now, as detailed by reports from the United Nations, we saw a dramatic worsening of world hunger in 2020, much of it likely related to the fallout from COVID-19. But while the pandemic's impact has yet to be fully mapped, the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World report for 2021 estimates that around 1/10 of the global population, 811 million people, were undernourished in 2020. Overall, more than 2.3 billion people, or 30% of the world's population, lacked year-round access to adequate food, and that indicator, known as the prevalence of moderate or severe food insecurity, leapt in 1 year as much as the preceding 5 years combined. Gender inequality also deepened. For every 10 food insecure men, there were 11 food insecure women in 2020, and that was up from 2019. Today, the conversation has become much more complex as the pandemic and global conflicts have highlighted just how interrelated and interconnected the world really is and exposed the weaknesses in our food systems which threaten the lives and livelihoods of people around the world. Transforming our food systems is vital to achieving food security, improving nutrition, and putting healthy diets within the reach of all. So today we'll be discussing the need for a resilient supply chain that can outlast this pandemic as well as withstanding others. The sustainable agricultural development. How do we meet the current needs while ensuring future resources? And what are the ways that we need to redesign our food systems for a more sustainable and equitable future where no one is left behind? So my name is Sally Musa, and I am so incredibly pleased to be joined by this phenomenal panel of speakers who will be answering all of these questions and more. First to my left here, Abdul Majid Yahya is the Director of the United Nations World Food Programme Office in the UAE and WFP representative to the GCC. He manages the support and provision of services for humanitarian operations, but also leads efforts to reinforce program partnerships with government bodies as well as the private and public sectors in the region. Armin Sadrakian is an economist for the Food and Agriculture Organization's sub-regional office for the GCC and Yemen, bringing over 15 years of experience in implementing rural development programs focused on the analysis of food security and agricultural policy. And last but not least, joining us all the way from New Zealand, Louise Nash is the founder and CEO of Circularity, an organization dedicated to helping businesses design a better future by applying circular economy principles to reduce harm and create new value. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming all of our speakers this morning. Now, a reminder to everybody, we will be taking questions at the end, and that includes everybody who's joining us online as well. Please do send in your questions too. Now, Abdelmajid, if I can start with you, let's set the scene now and take a look at the current state of supply chains and the way that they are under major stress, you say, right now. Not only have we had to deal with COVID, but of course what's going on in the Ukraine. Lebanon as well is being majorly impacted here in the region. Let's take a look at the outlook for food security in 2022 as we've just passed 2 years into the pandemic and we're 8 years out from the 2030 SDG agenda.
Well, just to start with, in brief, one word, it doesn't look good. 2015, the world leaders came together, they signed the SDGs, that one of them, or the second goal, is actually the zero hunger to be achieved by 2030. Progress was made, but then seeing from 2016, 2017, and going forward, we have seen a decline in the food security situation. And as you mentioned at the beginning, there are today 830 million people in the world that they go hungry to bed every night. This is compounded with also the conflicts, the armed conflicts is a major drive of food insecurity. Second comes the climate changes. We are seeing now the drought in the Horn of Africa. For years, it's going consecutive year, it's coming up again. The Sahel in Africa is also facing the same situation. Afghanistan is facing the same situation. So it's armed conflict, the climate change, and then came the COVID. And of course, the COVID had like very negative effect on the markets, on the income of the population. If you talk about Africa, for example, 80% of the population, they are in the informal business. So the lockdown meant that they stay home. So markets are closed, and then they cannot earn to feed themselves. So the situation got even worse with the COVID. At the same time, you have the supply chain also got really disrupted during the COVID. And we have seen and witnessed how the shipping cost doubled in 2021 and so on. And we thought, let's say by 2022, COVID will be behind us. But now, just 2 weeks ago, we have another major disruption to the supply chain and a negative cause for the food insecurity as well. Russia and Ukraine. 30% of the world grain is produced in these two countries. The Black Sea is a major corridor of the grains. So at WFP, this 50% of our food procurement comes from that region. Today, contracts either canceled or we don't know what's the status of it as to the delivery time. And at the same time, because of the war also, we have seen increase in the fuel prices and the oil prices for, I think it's the first time in the last 12 years, or more than 12 years it happens. So that added the cost of shipping. So all in all, today at WFP, what we're facing just an operational increase, increase in operational cost by $50 to $70 million a month. So that's the effect of it. When can we source these quantities of food? We need, on annual basis, 5 to 6 million tons of food that we distribute in 84 countries around the world. 80% of this goes to countries that are in conflict zone. So the situation doesn't look good. We hope that by, as I was saying, 2022, we will be able to recover and stand up again. But unfortunately, what's happening is a major disruption to the supply chain, is a major sort of taking us back on the food security, on achieving the zero hunger in 2030. Talking about that, achieving the zero hunger in 2030, despite all what is happening, the world can achieve the zero hunger in 2030. It can, because it can. But just there are major steps need to be taken. Stop the conflicts. Build resilience to deal with the climate changes. Because the world produces more food than it needs today. So we can. But with what's happening, I don't think, with the conflicts ongoing, with all this disruption, with all the increasing cost, and I don't think we can do that. And whenever there is a conflict, now if we are seeing what we have seen also from the Syria crisis and all this, it does not stay in the locality. We have seen the Syria crisis is felt in Berlin. And of course, it has, you talked about gender at the beginning. You talked about the woman. What food security is the drive for early marriage, is the drive for influx of refugees and migration and all these things. So it's all, but end of the day, food security is national security. And we'll talk about this, of course.
Absolutely. It is all so incredibly interconnected and interdependent, as we did say. Let's take a little bit of a look now at the work that the World Food Programme does. And it's very, very important work. Let's take a look. Thank you so much.
شكرا لكم.
This incredibly vital work that is just getting more and more important every day. Armin, if I can come to you now. You've heard the pressure points that Majid has highlighted there, and the pandemic is, of course, one of the biggest issues here. But you say that the UAE has actually been incredibly proactive in terms of thinking about food security and devising a plan, a very long-term plan for it that is very holistic. So talk to us a little bit about, how this really stands out, but also how that plan has evolved through this pandemic and through crises like these.
Thank you. Very happy to be with you in this panel. Very important and interesting discussion we're having. Indeed, UAE was well prepared before the pandemic. Actually, the importance given to the food security and nutrition issue started after food crisis 2007 and 2008, when the food prices was very high and availability of food was a very important topic. And food bill in the GCC countries, for GCC countries, increased. Thanks to importation to UAE and GCC countries, where 60–80% of food are being imported, there is no issue per se as availability of food and food security. But the country, UAE, has developed in 2018 a very strong and sound food security strategy and frameworks. And it targeted 5 important strategic directions: facilitating trade, reducing food loss and waste, promoting and boosting local production based off technologies and innovation approaches, and emergency preparedness. So this strategic framework, along with many measures and activities in the wake of COVID, allowed the country to supply food and overcome the unprecedented challenges. So, but after and during and after the pandemic, a lot of more interest was given to food security and nutrition issues, especially for food safety, nutrition, including overweight and non-communicable diseases issues, but particularly food production locally, which seen as a very concrete and firm mean to reduce the dependency of food imports. And a lot of has been done. Still a lot of things need to be done in terms of efficient use of resources, so that producing more sustainably. But another strategic direction include diversification of trade options and sources, and of course reducing loss and waste.
There's a lot there that we are going to be talking about and we're going to unpack as well that is vital to transforming our food systems here. Louise, I'd love to bring you into the conversation as you work to redesign systems by getting to the root of the problem in order to create a more resilient and regenerative system for a thriving future. So let's talk about the current challenges for our linear supply chain. Where are the biggest weaknesses that you see, and how can we build resilience by closing loops and going circular?
Thank you, Sally. Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's an absolute pleasure to come across the world and have this discussion. When we hear that we are producing more food than we need, and yet we have all these challenges with food insecurity, with nutrition, we must be thinking that the system is broken. Our supply chains are built around being lean, efficient, and linear. So we are taking from our natural resources to grow. We're impacting them beyond repair, almost. We're making the food, and when it lands in those places where we deliver them to consumers and to people, there is a significant amount of waste. So what we're seeing right across the board of those supply chains is some significant challenges, not to mention the emissions that are generated through every step of that transportation journey, because we're currently running a very high carbon supply chain system. So the opportunity, because it is an opportunity, we can design it to be better. If we think in circular, just like nature does, nature operates in circular flows of nutrients, moving materials, moving nutrients through the system. We have a real opportunity to close the loop on those waste streams. We can recover what is wasted, we can remake and reprocess it, and we can get it to those in need and build our resilience.
Where do we start in terms of thinking about this problem? Where are the opportunities that you see here, the biggest weaknesses?
A lot of us, when we come to this problem, we think we just need to educate consumers at the end to reduce their waste. But what we're finding is throughout the whole system, even at harvest level or at the production side, there's actually more waste there. When you're looking at supply agreements across the world, it is very, very hard to manage supply and demand when you're a grower in one country and supplier to another. So we see the greatest opportunity is to diversify locally in that space, to create connections and distributed networks, both connecting everyone across the system from growers with end consumers to be able to disperse and distribute food that's grown in abundance, but also across retailers and wholesalers. So if a producer of food produces in excess, they can be connected to other producers and therefore use that as a feedstock. It's been quantified that this is about a $4.5 trillion opportunity to convert waste into wealth opportunities. And we see that it happens right across, not just in food, but how these nutrients can be turned into textiles. We're seeing pineapple leather being made out of pineapple skins. We're seeing coffee beans that have gone through and been used for coffee. Beautiful drink can then be reprocessed and reused as skincare. So significant opportunity that can address a number of these issues.
It's significant in terms of the sustainability aspect, but it's also significant in terms of the possibilities for entrepreneurship and for the bottom line, really, as well. So they are there to be really, really harnessed and taken advantage of. If I can come back to you, Abdelmajid, when we talk about the work of WFP, 115.5 million people, the largest since 2012, in 84 countries, as you did say, were helped in 2020. So talk to us about WFP's contribution to ensuring a resilient supply chain during health crises like COVID, and your main takeaways from the experience of the pandemic.
Well, look, since we are really involved in the food sector, then we had to have a very strong supply chain system. Talking about moving 4 or 5 million tons of food annually is not just easy. And we have built that experience. We have built that system through 60 years. And as you have seen from the video here, we are not short of ideas on how to deliver, be it by planes, be it by animals, be it by cranes, be it by whatever. So, and that gave us a very strong position as the food agency of the UN system. But at the same time, we are also the logistics backbone of the UN system as a whole. So we worked with, provide our supply chain expertise to other agencies during the Ebola, for example, in 2014 and 2015. We really had major operations there in assisting the WHO and the local governments and so on from a supply chain perspective. Again, during the pandemic, we put our supply chain also at the disposal of the WHO and the UNICEF and also the local governments in many parts of the world, where we had to transport hospitals, we have to transport the PPEs and all this protective gear needed. So, today, I can say confidently that one of the strongest aspect of the World Food Programme is supply chain, because we deal with very sensitive commodities that need to be transported on time, that need to be kept safe, that need to be distributed and so on. But also at the same time, our supply chain, and for the last 10 years, has been also involved in the cash transfers. Because in countries where we see that the markets are functioning, then we distribute cash, which also give the beneficiaries the choice to go and buy what they would like to consume. So, and today also we distribute more than $2 billion and in cash. The voucher program, which supply chain also manage the contracting of the retail sector, where we have like contracts with these suppliers and supermarkets where beneficiaries, they go and redeem the assistance through this. So back to your question, yes, the supply chain is like the backbone of what we do, without which then we are really, we cannot do what we do today. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Armin, when we look at the top of that supply chain, or the beginning of that supply chain, when we talk about the way that we produce food, when we talk about the farmers, and the need to change farming practices, because the way that we are producing food now, we actually have enough to feed the planet, but so much of it is going to waste. And so what kind of technologies do we need to employ to reduce that waste, to reduce water loss, to reduce land degeneration, and so on and so forth? What do you see there?
It's, first of all, it's in a very natural, it's about knowledge, technology, and adopting the technology to produce more in an efficient manner, to using more efficiently the resources, but also as within FAO we call it for betters, better for production. That means to enable the environment to produce more sustainably. Second is better for nutrition, to produce in a way that provide the healthy diets and ending the hunger, and better consumption and better life. So back to farmers' side. First of all, we need to help the farmers to adopt the new technologies. They have the access to new practices, best practices, and also most importantly to the markets. There is a lot of waste. We already touched upon the issue of waste. Wasting means waste of money, waste of water, waste of land that was used to produce that food. So the farmers need to be equipped with all the means and knowledge to use the resources in producing the food in a very, very much efficient way. In our region, for GCC countries, the water is very scarce. So the water need to be used and utilized efficiently. So the technologies that target efficient use of water is really central, but also the usage of non-conventional sources of water, and also energy. The sources of energy is also very important for the farmers to produce in a sustainable manner.
All of that is absolutely vital. And I know in Saudi Arabia, they're doing some amazing work around growing rice crops as well at KAUST, King Abdullah University for Science and Technology, where they're looking at using natural variants of a genus called Oriza. Kind of sounds like ruz, right? Oriza. And they're growing it with a lot less water, growing it in brackish water even, salty water, which is normally very difficult and doesn't work with farming. So there are lots of incredible technologies being seen there as well. Louise, talk to us a bit more about regenerative agriculture and horticulture. to reduce our carbon footprint and create reciprocity in the way that we grow food?
Such a great topic. I think the most incredible thing in our decade of action towards reducing our emissions is the tools at our disposal in the food system. So we have the ability to draw down carbon as we grow our food and support nature in that effort, as well as reducing the emissions of everything that we make and produce in the economy. So about half of our global emissions is generated by what we produce. The other half is the energy that we use. So such a significant opportunity to shift to regenerative horticulture that enables us to give more than we take. And we see largely the tool in that space is diversification. If you think about the food that we have in the world, we're currently about 3/4 of the food that we have is 12 grains and 5 livestock. Staggering factor when you think that we have about 200,000 edible plants in the world that we can have, and a lot of indigenous plants that are used in the space traditionally. So if we can start to diversify what we grow, if we can support those crops through biodiversity, we're essentially supporting nature to draw down that carbon for us. And to be honest, that would be my bet.
And that's really vital, but that all takes a lot of knowledge and a lot of, coming back to understanding the way that nature works as well, and kind of, I guess, not being at odds with it as well, because I feel like the way that agriculture has worked so far has been very much at odds with nature, exploitative, and not working with it, rather working against it. So give us some examples where we are working with nature and the impact that that has had.
Yes, we're seeing some really interesting developments, particularly around the mix of agriculture and horticulture. We're seeing new cheeses being developed where we've got walnut trees being grown, as well as cows and dairy cows being farmed. So some really incredible mixed models. And the success of that is not just in how we're restoring nature through that natural production cycle. So the animals are natural grazers on the land. What they do with their hoofs is really interesting in terms of regenerating the soils, allow for recropping. It also drives biodiversity on those sites. If we can start to do that and create the story of regenerative agriculture, it can translate all the way up to the consumer end, because we know that more people are searching for that. More people are looking for connections with the food, with the land, and with sustainable products. So that market capital can be realised. We know that there's a lot of investment in the space around green bonds. And we're seeing some really incredible shifts in that space down under, where we're able to grow in that way.
And that translates into all kinds of things where we're talking about increased wellness and well-being for the consumers as well, as they get more connected to nature and understand, again, the value of food. Abdelmajid, if I can come back to you and ask you as well about the way that the WFP is equipped to support supply chains and your partners worldwide, because obviously you are working with governments, you are working with the private sector. How are you bringing everybody together and how are you supporting them?
Our work, of course, first I must state that it is not that a work that we can do by ourselves. We need to have partners. And be it like governments on the ground, be it other organizations, because we need to complement each other. If you give food, and that only food, and that's obviously is not enough. You need also to support with food the education. Well, for example, we do the school meals to help continuing the education of children during crisis or during conflicts and so on. So the partnership is very important. We are also funded entirely on voluntary basis. So we rely on member states, on governments, on individuals, on the private sector to help us with that. And so far, we have been successful in there. For example, in 2021, we were able to raise over $9.5 billion Yes, our requirement today stands as 15 billion. We know how also governments and donors, like their economies are stretched and so on. But we are hopeful that we will be able, because as I was saying, it is not the question of one country that is facing an issue. So if that country is facing an issue, then we will feel it somewhere else. So partnership is very important for us, because simply we cannot do it alone. This is a huge task. We cannot do it by ourselves. And in the meantime, of course, whatever we develop in terms of expertise, in terms of capacities and so, then that is also made at the disposal of other actors and partners in the field.
Absolutely. It is vital that everybody is part of the process too. Armin, we have seen trends in local food production in the last couple of decades, I would say, here in the UAE, and that is something that has been building up globally, but particularly, I think, in the UAE. And the UAE has been challenged with its own climate, which is not very forgiving to growing food here, and we've had to be very innovative about how we do that. Why is growing food locally so important to our food security, both here and in the UAE and elsewhere?
First of all, it's so important, as we mentioned, is to reducing the dependency of food imports and any international market supply disturbance. This is the most important, perhaps, element. But producing locally means shortening the supply chains, so increasing the access and availability of more fresh food. And in the UAE, a lot of, in the past several years, a lot of investments, a lot of technology was put in place to produce locally. And thanks to controlled environment agriculture, the country can now produce more fruits, vegetables locally. Still, if we speak about cereals and staple foods, economically and environmentally, they're still not feasible to produce, but the UAE has been increasing its local production capacity drastically, and now we have locally in supermarkets locally produced vegetables, greens, even fish like sea bream, sea bass. So producing food is, as I said, is availability of more fresh, nutritious food, but also for producers, it's access to markets, more incentive to produce. It's a win-win for all the players along the food systems.
Yeah, I can see you nodding there as well to that, Louise. I know that this is something that's really important to you as well in terms of growing food locally. Why does that have such a big impact?
Well, on a number of fronts, I think food is a uniter around culture, and it brings people together around the table. And to be honest, I kind of believe that the ability to grow your own food is almost part of a human right. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of our systems have taken us away from that ability. And we've definitely faced that in Aotearoa and Down Under. Food resilience requires us to have shorter supply chains and to be looking at products that would otherwise go to waste across larger supply chains. So particularly produce, we see that as very challenging to ship globally. So things that we can grow locally. I also see it as a real innovation opportunity to work with nature. It's with great joy that I see the plants and the trees that are growing here locally, in the sand with a lack of water, with very high rates of sunshine. And I think being able to watch what can grow where is a really important observation in the market. We have a lot of solutions available to us that nature is doing already. How do we enhance and scale that? And I just want to pick up on that point around the global supply chains are the backbone of how we transport food. If we think about them in a circular way, we can use them as reverse logistics to send food that is otherwise going to waste in some markets to other markets. And we can use that lean and efficient way that those supply chains have been set up to enable that transportation of those nutrients. In various forms. We don't necessarily need to send the bananas as a bunch of bananas. We can dry them and send them as nutrients that can flow into other markets. So a lot of that we have at our disposal. We just need to make the most of it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important to highlight, as you are saying there, some innovative examples of how we can create circular supply chains as well, rather than just seeing them be linear.
Well, we largely see that the linear system creates disconnections in the market. So it creates disconnections between the growers and the consumers, between the retailers and the wholesalers. And if you think circular, essentially you are creating ways that those actors in the system can be connected. So we're already seeing some really innovative examples, and I'll just give a couple. One is an app that was developed called Foodprint. It was developed specifically for the hospitality industry, which has high-value product that's very desirable. But at the moment, with the pandemics and running through various lockdowns, the hospitality industry has been really impacted around food waste and what they can sell. So Foodprint came into the market, and essentially it communicates with customers, with end consumers, to become rescuers of the food and disperse that not only to their household, but their communities, and they buy the food. So there's a market value because they know that that restaurateur has amazing food, they don't want it to go to waste, and they're more than willing to pay a fee to have that come to their house, particularly if they're in lockdown and can't get to the good places. So Foodprint is that way that connects those players across the system that otherwise wouldn't be. We're also seeing apps start up that do that at a wholesale level. So if you're a big food manufacturer and you're unable to sell your product into the consumer, into the supermarket space, but it could still be used as an ingredient into another product, whether it's cream cheese, whether it's bread, all of those things can operate at a wholesale market. We're seeing digital apps that enable those connections.
I think you've highlighted something really important here, and that's the importance of data in this equation of how do we build more efficient supply chains and to connect all of the different actors that are part of it and to make it more circular in that way. So Abdul Majid, I want to ask you about WFP's role in the supply chain, how that has evolved, in fact, at a country level to promote more sustainable agriculture.
To promote more?
More sustainable agriculture.
Well, the very first thing we do when we are in a country where we need to provide food assistance is that first we buy food locally where possible. In Africa, for example, you have 80% of the food there is produced by smallholders farmers. But what they're facing is they don't have access to markets. They don't have logistics. They don't have storage facilities, and so on. So by helping them through buying the food from them, this is actually helping them continue to and build their resilience there. So this is the first thing we do. We need food. Okay, we need to look for it locally here. Because also those farmers, they produce what is normally consumed in there. So we're not bringing food that is not suitable for the diet of this. The second thing also we do there is help in the markets, okay, where I mentioned the cash transfers that we do. Because here, we need to do two things. First, we need to simulate the markets, where we inject the money into the local markets through giving the money to the beneficiaries, where they go and buy it. It has two effects. First, it gives them the choice. So they buy what they would like to consume. And second, it helps into the local economy as well, because you are injecting cash into that local economy. So this is done two ways. Either when it comes that the market is not functioning, for example, then we go and buy locally from the farmers, and then we distribute it. And I give you like many examples in there. We have, for example, in Afghanistan, the best wheat is produced in the north, in the areas of Kunduz. But the farmers, they face also the issues of the access. They don't have access to markets. They can't transport the wheat to the needy south. So we come in and we buy from them. If we don't do that, what happens? They would abandon the wheat. And they will go, of course, for the wheat instead, because the supply chain, unfortunately, of that commodity is very high advanced, or very much advanced than the food in itself. So this is how we do it. Like, we take it from them, we buy from them, and we have another type of programs which is called Purchase for Progress, which is like when we come to a place, then we help in the farmers by establishing storage facilities for them. We build it, warehouses, for example, or we build small silos for them so that they can keep their food in good shape. And this is, and with FAO, for example, also, we come and provide them with like how the seed for their production, and then we come in also with the food ration so that the seeds are used to plant, that is planted, not consumed in many cases. So there are different things that we do in the field. That first is, but the first thing we look at is help the local communities first. Look at ways when you can help them also, because unfortunately, for the last 20 years or so, we have been 80% of where we operate is conflict zones. So it's a saving lives operation, but we need also to work on the changing lives operations where they can come and stand on their feet again and help themselves.
Yes, absolutely, and to empower local producers.
Exactly.
Particularly smallholder farmers. So I would love to put that to you as well, Armin, in terms of how do we, in these vulnerable food insecure areas, a lot of the farmers there are smallholder farmers. So how do we help them? How do we support them and empower them?
It's already been mentioned about access to market. It's so important to enable the situation, the environment in a way that farmers has access to market, to sell to market their produce commodities. It's also about the adoption of practices and technologies. The support services, extension services coming, and linkages between research and development is very important. There are a lot of technologies and research now is happening, but the adoption, these research and technologies by farmers is very important. So the knowledge and support services given to farmers are very central here. Access to financing, assets, especially land, water, safe water security, the infrastructure for access to markets, but also roads and investments are all necessary for smallholders, but also encouraging youth and targeting youth to be more interested and in agriculture, because in many developing countries, as we already mentioned, the rural poor has no other livelihood than agriculture. So youth investing in research and education for youth to do agriculture and farming is very important. Yeah.
It really is. It's vital to support them in that way, to make that more viable, because that is, at the best of times, agriculture and farming are some of the most difficult industries to be in at the very best of times. Louise, I want to talk a little bit about how do we also go back to traditional, I don't want to say farming practices, but knowledge of the land, where we tap into indigenous knowledge of, we're talking about growing locally. Well, all of that goes back to understanding who we are, where we come from, and having that very close connection to the land that our ancestors had, that we seem to be losing now. We've moved so far away from it. We're thinking, more about investment, markets, profits, rather than how do we use the land in the most sustainable way. So what can we learn? What can we reintegrate into our farming and production practices?
I'm reading a great book at the moment called Braiding Sweetgrass, which talks about Indian American agriculture practices. And they have this approach to growing, they call the Three Sisters. And it sits at the heart of their growing practices. And it uses corn, squash, and beans. And I think it provides a symbol to us for how we can grow food into the future. Because there's a symbiotic relationship that's developed between those three products. The squash protects the soil, it's a cover crop from the heat and acts as a compost. The beans and the sweet corn bind together to hold that up and draw down carbon. And the three together provides a nutritious meal. It's just one example of how we learnt to work with nature and grow at scale to feed communities. And there are so many of those examples that we can work with. I put it to our audience and our listeners that if we worked with nature and not against it in our food production, we would be able to tackle the emissions that we are facing, because we would be able to draw down the carbon and produce nutritious food for our people. And as I've mentioned, the answers are there for us to do that.
We just have to make sure that we're tapping into them. One of the most important things here is not just making sure that we do provide food, Abdelmajid, but of course, to make sure that it is nutritious. That is vitally important. Otherwise, the whole thing is useless. So how do we go about ensuring maximum nutrition while also meeting the demand?
Well, food security can only be achieved if there are 3 or 4 elements there, one of which is the availability of food. The second, if there is access to food. And then the third is that the food we're consuming is the nutritious. And then all the elements must be there so that we can say there is a food security there. So it is important that the food that is consumed is nutritious, particularly in the early days of life. And here also comes our role, working as WFP and UNICEF, working together to also target the undernourishment, particularly during the first 1,000 days of the child life there. It is very important that nutritious food is provided during this period, not only to the children, but also to the pregnant and lactating mothers as well. Because if that is not done, then you have the cycle continues like this. Undernourished mother will only give birth to undernourished child. And these undernourished children will have problems in in the education, and then later on, they will become a burden to the national economy. So, and this is caused globally, it costs like billions of dollars today. So it is not just about people, they think whatever you eat is good or enough. No, it is not that. We have seen in many places, in Jordan, for example, the Syrian population or the refugees there, they are facing anemia. They consume food, but that is not nutritious also. And this is not a matter of like, today it can be resolved. If it's not resolved today, then the consequences are really long-term. Education is really important for that. And it starts at home, at the home level, at schools. For example, in schools, we provide also the school meals. But school meals that we have to really select what we give to these children at this age. So it's school meals that is fortified with vitamins and minerals and all these things. So in some places, by the way, we face competitions from the school canteens, who also like sell chocolates and chips and all these things. So the children may prefer to go to the canteen and so on. So, but these can overcome through educations and so on. And it is important. I mean, we are happy today that we are able, as WFP, to be able to provide school meals to 16 million children around the world. Because if we stop that, then you can imagine the consequence. One of the immediate consequences of that is the dropout from schools, which then will hurt the economy later on. So education about the food is really important.
This SDG relates to every single other SDG. You cannot achieve any of the others without getting this one right. This is just so incredibly important. And I love that you highlighted the way that, you know, school canteens, that a lot of the time we do see this, they're not providing the most nutritious food, and it's, you know, junk food, and because it's easy to ship, it's cheap. So I'm going to put that question to you, Armin. Cost is a barrier. It is a massive barrier when we're talking about better quality, more nutritious food. So how do we balance that out? How do we make sure that we are all getting the access to much better quality food that is produced more sustainably, but also in a way that balances out with the costs that we are able to pay? Should there be subsidies? Should there be other ways of making sure that people have access to this kind of food?
There are a lot of complexity in this question and in the system. First, there are over 3 billion people in the world that has no access to healthy diet, minimum the healthy diet. But the healthy diet comes from fresh and not ultra-processed food. So from consumer perspectives, it's not always necessary that healthy choices are expensive. It's a lot about mindsets, a lot of changing mindsets, shift to more healthy, finding more alternative and nutritious, dense food like fruits and vegetables. And in the UAE, for example, as we produce more vegetables and greens, we have more availability and access to affordable, healthy food. So it's by shortening value chains, producing more. With this, we provide enough incentives for producers to produce more good food, nutritious food, but also from the consumer's perspectives, it's more access to affordable. So it's very complex. It's not only the quality side, but more on the affordability and access and consumer behavior and education.
It's a fine balance that we need to strike there. I want to open the floor to questions from our audience. If there are questions for our speakers around food security, yes, please. Can we just get a microphone, please, for the question here?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the speaker. It was a really inspiring exchange. What we can understand is that the supply chain resilience is depending on the supply chain continuum. I'm coming from a researcher's perspective with an analytic view. I understand there are many external factors that the World Food Programme identified, which we can't change. But what about the internal factors that were mentioned? We have circularity. We have shorter supply chains. What are the challenges in upbringing circularity in shorter paths to a global scale? The World Food Programme is one of the best examples of bringing food everywhere in the world, globally. But what are the challenges you are facing in breaking the supply chain continuum, which is ensuring nowadays is ensuring that everyone is served, but is also hindering resilience? That would be my question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Abdelmajid, if you want to take that.
Well, the challenges we are facing now, particularly if you talk about just the supply chain, is you can say it happens during wartime. This is what actually happened. So the point is that we have to come up with alternatives. Alternatives are there, but they're costly. And maybe you have noticed in the video, like the airdrops that we have. This is for us, this is the last resort. But when there is no access at all because of ongoing war, because of terrain, because of that we cannot, then we resort to this. So the alternatives are always there. In Nepal during the earthquake, 2014, 2015, we had to use like the animals in order to reach the population who were stranded in the heights of the mountains. So it's always that there are alternatives, but it comes at cost. Today, with the situation, it's highly costly to move food from point A to point B. Increase of oil prices, increase also of bringing the food from the Black Sea corridor, not only just because of the high cost of the oil, but the insurance cost as well, because this also has increased. So, as I said, this is adding like $50 to $70 million on our operation cost just on monthly basis. So the challenges are always there. We will not expect to have like a smooth supply chain that we will be able to deliver from there. Even internally, when the food arrives in the country, to move it, particularly in the conflict-hit areas, how to move the food from point A to point B is, of course, a challenge. Because of security, because of the situation that there is a conflict ongoing, and so on. In one of the operations, and I think it was shown just briefly in the video, that the only way to deliver food, we had to use cranes, because it was between the borders from Jordan to Syria. We could not cross to the border, so we had to put the crane in Jordan to deliver in the no man's land. So yes, if I understand your question correctly, yes, alternatives are there, but they come at high cost.
Louise, what are the challenges to our viewers' question? What are the challenges to taking circularity and scaling it and taking these? It's great to have these solutions here and there and on a small scale, but how can we scale it up?
Often it's just a mindset. So an acceptance that the outcomes of the current linear system aren't working and we need to think about it differently. It's an innovative mindset, but it's also one that has an understanding of the ability of technology. I was just thinking about that example just straight there in terms of distributing food across the global network of of people that need it. Data and technology will provide us with the ability to do that at scale, with different kinds of business models around that. The current food system is not a very good investment. If you are a supermarket or a retailer, the cost of food that you are facing, the amount of waste that occurs and what you can sell the food for is about half the true cost of that food in the world, the cost of the ecological services. We have to be thinking about this differently. And by using technology and data, changing our mindsets, we can apply circularity just like nature does to everything in the system.
It has to surely be also about having urgency for this issue and understanding the true magnitude of what it is doing to us as people, as planet as well. Sorry, yeah.
Yes, we have a saying, and with the governments and the businesses that we work with in this space, we have to love the problem. We spend a lot of time in solution land, which is great, but when you truly love the problem in a system, you look for different ways and more targeted ways that you can create solutions. So I'd encourage everyone to look deeply at the problems that exist in the global food system, because there will be unlimited amount of opportunities for us to solve.
Absolutely. Questions for our speakers? Yes, hi. Can we get the microphone to the back?
Okay, thank you very much for this very interesting discussion, especially from a person like me that comes from the agricultural field. And I'm coming from one of the poorest countries of the world, Mozambique in Africa, Southern Africa. And I'm really worried about the whole discussion about food security, food insecurity, especially because, as was said here, most of the small-scale farmers, they cannot compete with big companies like Monsanto and the other players of the field. But we can talk here for ages about these trade wars and the World Trade Organization and so on. But my point is, how do we change the mindset of the people? Because all the world cannot be eating Cavendish bananas, for example, or yellow corn or other foods. Can we change the mindset of the people for start eating insects, for example, or producing bread with a little bit of cassava flour, like the Brazilians do, or other? Because we had forecasted that we should have 9 billion people in this planet by 2050. We are almost reaching 8 billion by 2022. The United Nations forecasted that we will be 11 billion by 2100. But nowadays, I think we will have a higher population than that. Thank you very much.
So who would like to take that? How do we change the mindset of people to diversify their diets and think about other sources as well? Armin.
Education. Education is as a starting point.
I think you mentioned eating insects as well. I'm not sure that I was going to go for that, Yanni. Like, there are certain things. I'm not sure that I would go for eating insects, but should we be opening our minds and really thinking about this?
This is happening in many parts of the world because of lack of access to quality protein, and insects can be a good source of quality protein, and it's just about customs, traditions which need to be can be changed, and it is happening, but I mention education because starting from schools, children can be educated that there is nothing wrong in having access to quality protein or safe food, but it's a process. It will not take
Listen, you know, I'm kind of like going, oh, but this is an indigenous, it is an indigenous food source as well. You know, I come from Australia. I know that the indigenous Australians, they eat what they call widgety grubs, right? And so they're like these, they look like caterpillars and whatever. And that's a food for them. Like that's a traditional food and that's totally acceptable. And like you said, Armin, it's what you're used to. It's what you understand. It's what is part of your tradition as well. And I see you, you know, laughing there, Louise. You know, I'd love for you to add to that.
Thank you so much for your question.
Yeah.
I had the great pleasure of actually being proposed to in Mozambique. My husband proposed there. It's a beautiful country. My thought is it comes by bringing the actors together in the food system with the growers. We're too far away from planning our food system around consumers and what consumers want and what the demand over that side is. In my mind, we need to plan our food system around what the growers can grow and grow where. So yes, it relates to what we can grow naturally and traditionally in that space. But start to experiment and watch and observe when you diversify how nature responds to it and what you can do. In Japan, they've had great success in introducing ducks into rice paddies, which has enabled them to remove fertilizer because the ducks essentially are acting as the natural insect eater. So you don't have to eat the insects, the ducks will, Sally. You know, I would look at what you can work with nature with in your country. Recently in New Zealand, because of the pandemic, for over 2 years, we lost our tourism industry, like many countries have faced. That was a third of our GDP, but ironically, during that time, our GDP rose. So these things that we think that we're reliant on, we're not necessarily so. They are flows in the economy, and we just need to redirect them. For each country, let's stand on our own merit of what we can grow, what the ecology is in that country, what we can work with. You'll be surprised what nature will do in response.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of good marketing. It can make people do anything. If they will eat buckets of kale, they will eat other things as well. Any other questions that we have for our panel here? From everybody. It does bring us, yes, sorry, did we have no? We didn't have another question? Okay, thank you so much. I wanted to end off by saying thank you so much to our speakers who have really truly shown us today how important it is to transform our food systems, because it's important for people, it is important for planet, it is important for our survival and for us to thrive. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our speakers today, Louise Nash, Armin Sadrakian, and Abdelmajid Yahya. Thank you all so much. And thank you all for being part of the audience today.